this moment. Now we're in sync. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
May I ask you to please tell us your name?
It's Dr. Pernella Rowena Deams.
Very nice. And which do you prefer to be called?
Dr. Deams is fine.
Dr. Deams, excellent, because I know how hard it took to get that degree, so it ain't nothing you take lightly. And may I ask you please to tell us a little bit about yourself, anything you feel comfortable sharing?
Sure. So I currently work in higher education. My role is Vice President for Student Engagement and Campus Life. I currently work at Kentucky State University. I am a adamant, what I call myself, HBCU enthusiast and advocate. I love the HBCU space. Kentucky State is the 4th HBCU where I've worked at. My undergraduate journey was at Southern University and A&M College in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I am a 2nd generation college student and am proud of the 3rd generation that's coming along and also selecting HBCUs. And so after Southern University, I went to University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, Mississippi for my master's degree, and then on to Tennessee State University, which is my 2nd HBCU, where I acquired my doctorate in counseling psychology. And what I brag about Tennessee State because it's the 2nd HBCU to be fully APA accredited in counseling psychology, which is my, my discipline. So I worked at Tennessee State while I was a student. I was a graduate assistant and a teaching assistant. And then after Tennessee State, was in the community college space for a little while, and then went on to Grambling State University, which was my 2nd, was department chair of sociology and psychology there. And then on to Talladega College, where I was department chair of psychology there, and then came to Kentucky State, originally serving as dean of students, and then serving in the role as vice president for student engagement and campus life.
Excellent. That's wonderful, beautiful journey. I am a triple HBCU graduate, so I got two undergraduate degrees and my master's degree from HBCU, and I got my doctorate from East Carolina. So my only dalliance outside of HBCU, but I love it. I love my HBCU. It's a wonderful experience. And I tell people all the time, you know, when we think about things, you know, everybody wants to go to that predominantly white ranked college because supposedly you get a better job, you're paid more, and all of those other myths that they tell us. But the experience at the HBCU versus the experience at a predominantly white college is day and night. Oh, yeah. And that degree that you get at your HBCU may not cost you as much, but you gain a family. You feel connected, you feel like you belong. There are people who look like you, so you feel represented. You feel like you are in touch with people that are in tune with your success. Whereas when I went to East Carolina, you know, I was nothing more than a 7-digit number. Now I finished in 4. From the day I started, I walked out 4 years later with my doctorate degree, and there was no support other than my dissertation chair. My dissertation chair was a Black woman, marvelous Black woman, you know, very learned, you know, known all over the world for her work in law and Black affairs. And she was really what pushed me to go forward or to succeed. I didn't have any of that from any of my other colleagues in the 4 years. And I hear people talk about the comprehensive exam. My chair sat down and they said, this is the hardest test you're ever going to take. Said the week before, get your diet right, get your mind right, get your family right, get everything right, and prepare. And I passed my comps the first time. And it was because of that experience. I would not have had that success at East Carolina had she not been there. And I don't know if you had similar experiences like that, but I mean, like just knowing that there are people that are on your side pushing for you and not just wanting to collect your money, you know, to better their endowment.
Exactly. And what I say is, you know, I always tell people, you know, I believe African Americans belong in any space. I just have a passion and love for HBCUs, and similar to what you mentioned, the family experience that's organically cultivated there. Yeah. People pushing you, seeing the instructors and professors that look like you. You know, I had this thing within me where I wanted to make sure that I made my professors proud. Right. I wanted to make sure that the investment they were putting in me, I was taking that to heart and was making a return on that by being a great student. And the experiences, like I said, were phenomenal, similar to what you mentioned there. And I try to make sure that I provide that for the students that I interact with, that secondary familial, a mother, a aunt, a big sister kind of experience that pushes along their academic experience.
Well, that's wonderful. Where is Kentucky State in Kentucky? Is it in the center, east, west, north?
It's in Frankfort. Frankfort is actually the capital city.
Okay.
And so I want to say we're in the center.
Okay, that's very, very nice. And so do you find yourself often competing with Kentucky, the university, and Kentucky as a whole? Because, we hear about, so we're in March Madness now. And so all we hear about is Kentucky just got bounced, but that's all we hear. We don't hear about anything else like that, so how is the politics and the relations for Kentucky State and in Kentucky and with the University of Kentucky, around you?
Well, I believe that it's kind of in a unique space, one, because we're in the capital city. And of course, the other institutions are larger. We're a smaller institution, but I think one of the things that allows us to be successful and thrive is the uniqueness of what we are. We're the only public HBCU in the state of Kentucky. Wow. There's another HBCU in Kentucky, but it's private. That's Simmons College of Kentucky. And I think the uniqueness of what we bring to the table is what sets us apart. And again, it's the family experience, it's the dynamics of serving oftentimes first generation college students who have unique experiences, and they need that smaller, richer environment to be nurtured and to thrive. But since you bring in basketball, HBCUs, I'm telling you, they are truly some jewels. Yep. You almost saw Jackson State's women defeat LSU.
Yes, almost.
And so it's the great, like I said, it goes back to African Americans can be and belong in any space, but there's just something rich, again, that's cultivated in that HBCU.
Absolutely. And I think, and this may be a little bit left leaning, but I think that boys do so much better in historically Black colleges than they do in predominantly white colleges because of that nurturing and that aunt or mother or sisterly or whatever familial relationships you're able to develop. I had a student tell me there's a conference held here, had been held since COVID started, but it's called Black Communities. And it's people from all across the United States, the world come and speak to it. And one of the student groups that was there was here in our University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is just 8 miles down the road from where I live. And he said, I had never felt so unbelonged as I did the day I arrived on this campus. And I still struggle to belong in this campus. And so I'm sure you saw where we had the journalist who did the 1619 project, she was on the tenured list or wanted to be tenured at UNC, and she turned it down and went to Howard. Now, if you think about that financially, probably UNC could have paid more, could have had a little bit more esteem, but what is better than Howard University? And they're not my favorite because North Carolina Central is my favorite, but Howard is a pretty remarkable university. And for her to leave a predominantly white college and go to a historically Black college is absolutely, it's mind-boggling, but it's absolutely amazing at the same time, wow. But the pushback she felt trying to get her legs under her at UNC is typical of all predominant. So I worked at Duke until I retired in September. The entire time I felt like I was Black. That's it. I didn't feel like I was anything. So I've been a technologist for 44 years. I've got all these degrees, all this experience, and all I felt was Black, and go do your job and be quiet. And if you speak up, we're going to make your life miserable. I never felt that at North Carolina Central. When I went, I had a problem with one of my professors at Central. He was always asleep. And I won't say any more about that, but he was kind of like this here in the class, doing like this in class. So I went and told the chair, and it caused a whole bunch of uproar. And he was not Black, but it was amazing the way they paid attention to detail. And I want to ask you about that in your career. So I'm sure you get a lot of concerns from students, with grades and homesick and all those kinds of things. how do you nurture those students? So what's the thing that you do that empowers them and empowers you to have a successful relationship?
Well, what's funny is pre-COVID, it was really easy because you're able to engage the campus and walk around and interact. And, when students are involved in activities, so for example, fraternity and sorority life, or if they have a presentation or they're competing for something in athletics, of course you go and you support their games, you let them know that they matter to you outside the classroom. And that's what helps to build a relationship. But what happened with this time when we walked into this pandemic, and I always remind people, we're dealing with dual pandemics. We're dealing with COVID-19. And so you're isolated, you're masked up, you can't hug, you can't interact. These different barriers are put in place, but we're also dealing with racial trauma. Dealing with the different things that were going on during this time as well. So you're full, you want to scream, you want to protest, you want to open your mouth, but you got to cover your face because there's a pandemic. And I think what affected a lot of our students, and that's across the board, it weighs in on your mental health. When there's this thing that you want to scream and shout about, but you need to protect your face, but you need to protect your life and preserve your life, because
Right.
You don't know who else is out there when you are making that attempt to protest or to make a stance. And so that was kind of a lot of what students struggle with. And from other professionals that I heard who were dealing, particularly in student affairs, is that ability to engage and interact and get the voice out and to, make the noise. Our HBCUs are always have been the place and the birthing of, civil rights and voices and speaking out and creativity. Usually when there was something going on, it was some level of leadership, coming out of the HBCUs that produce the voice. Jesse Jackson in North Carolina A&T, Dr. King from Morehouse, Medgar Evers from Alcorn. So it was these and so many more, these voices coming out of the HBCUs that protected us. And so what did COVID do that maybe interrupted that next civil rights leader? Because we're still fighting for our civil rights. So what affected that next leader for speaking out and using their voice during this time? So those were some of the challenges. I think was not only were we used to being a hugging, nurturing, touching, feeling kind of environment, but when you're dealing with a pandemic, when you're dealing with racial trauma, when you're dealing with mental wellness being affected, that kind of somewhat hinders and interrupts the process. And so what we turn around and have to do is we still have to figure out how to do it. We have to figure out how to give a virtual hug, how to let people know we care, how to make sure we still establish the platforms for the voice. And so that was a lot of the work that we were doing in this season and time, was to make sure that our students are healthy and well. And that's how you express, love is not necessarily giving a hug, but love is making sure that, you are supported. We put in opportunities for your growth and nurturance, and also put in safety measures. It hurts sometimes to tell a student we can't have indoor activities. It hurts sometimes to stop a student and say, hey, pull your mask up, but these are things that are part of protecting them and keeping them safe. And that was still how you show forth that nurturance to them and keep the environment going and keep them engaged. For some students, they came to have an experience.
Right.
And when you have online learning and that's not your way of learning, you have to figure out how to still reach them in a virtual frame.
Absolutely. And in a lot of ways, what the pandemic really did was highlight how much disparity there is between Black and white and brown and white and whatever ethnicity. It did that. It also showed us, we had a lot of time to sit at home and look at TV. So we got to see Mr. Floyd being murdered on television. We get to watch that, or Marbury being shot. We got to watch that. For a lot of non-Black people, they were shocked by this. They were shocked that this was occurring. And we were like, it's always been there. Nothing has changed. I mean, we've gotten past Reconstruction. We've gotten past Jim Crow. We've gotten past all these other redlining and horrible things they did to us to hold us down. And yet still, we still are vulnerable, especially Black men are vulnerable. And that's not to say Black women are not, because, you know, we come equipped with a beautiful mouth that we don't mind speaking from. We speak up, which is sometimes makes some of our white brothers and sisters a little bit uncomfortable, but you know how to deal with it. That's what comes with us. But Black men, to me, are as vulnerable as they've ever been. And, you know, growing up in the 60s and 70s, to me at that time, it was a lot of violence. It was a lot of racial violence. Today, it's just more overt. You know, back then, you know, we covered it up under darkness, but now it's more overt. But with all those challenges you just spoke of, you still are able to connect with your students, provide them a good education, a safe space, and people that they can bond with. The pandemic, I think in a lot of ways, was just really something we needed to bring out some of the things that we can see, because now you see more opportunities for Black and brown people. You see more opportunities for women. You see these things happen, but I don't want anybody to think we're there. We are not, because in a heartbeat of a second, we'll go right back to where we are. And if you look at the news from across the world, almost every single day, somebody is killed by either law enforcement or someone of another race for nothing but race sake, you know, and that's unfortunate. So whoever the leaders are that are coming for tomorrow, and I think the leaders are all of us. I think each of us in our chair are the leaders of tomorrow. It's just a matter of using our voices and not being afraid to lose everything. Because Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin, whoever you name, lost everything for using their voice. They lost their lives, their livelihood, their families was disrupted. All of that for using your voice. The question is are we comfortable enough now with what we've achieved, that so-called American dream, to use our voice to speak about the wrongs that we see? And that's the thing that I think is really the most challenging thing in front of us, is feeling comfortable to lose everything, because those people lost. And I mean, not just those 3 or 4, but thousands of Black people lost everything for sharing their voice. You know, so in your world, how do you teach your kids to be warriors, to stand and stare down racism and discrimination and hate and bias? How do you incorporate that into your role?
So the first thing you said was your children. And I went immediately in my mind to my own. I have 4 children. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And I think when you were mentioning the time that we were dealing with the vulnerability of males, my daughter had to remind me that there's also vulnerability to females.
Absolutely.
And, you know, so one thing that was difficult for me as a parent was I have this, well, at the time, 19-year-old who was so ignited by everything that was going on. And there was different protests and rallies, and you know, she was excited, like, hey, I want to go to this, I want to go to that. And my first thought was, I love your energy, I love your enthusiasm, but as a mother, no, because I don't know who else is out there. I don't know who's in the crowd, who's planted. So I hated that it felt like I was at one point silencing her voice, but my priority was, I need to make sure you get home.
Come home.
Or yeah, I need to make sure you get home. And so that was difficult. That was difficult for me in that moment, trying to process that, because I think, you know, there were some different things I experienced when I was younger that I wish I spoke out a little bit more about, you know, that I saw and that I experienced. And so that was a bit of a challenge. I think for our students, again, the big thing is we want to make sure you're safe. Right. You know, I want to make sure that you're safe. I want to make sure that you make it back to, you know, where you have to be, where you should be. You know, and that you're careful in these things. And then also, what are the next steps? You know, we do our march and our speaking, but how do we get engaged with the programming? How do we get the funding to build our communities back up? How do we get the social resources to increase mental health services and awareness? How do we become advocates for other things that we need that are dually happening at the same time? And so sometimes I push a little differently as far as in the education realm to encourage, personnel to use their voices and their platform to make a difference in whichever way it is. So, how can you creatively share and do the things that matter to you or that make a difference in that aspect?
That's wonderful.
And the other thing about it is I'm careful to not make sure it sounds doesn't sound like the cowardice stance or the easy stance.
You need to answer that?
I'm sorry, yes, hold on.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
It's 5:29. I'm just trying to mark that time so I can edit that out. Let me ask you this question. So as a psychologist or trist, just as a psychologist, how do you deal with mental health issues in the Black community? Like my generation, so I just turned 19 again, although I'm actually 63. I just turned 19. So just keep that between you and I. Let's not tell anybody else.
I got you.
But I have attempted suicide. I don't know how many times. I have felt so depressed and such despair in my life. And, when I was really attempting suicide, was back in the 70s. And so back then they had automatic commit, a 72-hour commit for suicide. And I'd go into these mental institutions and I'd sit around and I'd listen to people talk about it. And it's like no one understood what I was saying. So my mother who raised me had just died. I had a brand new baby. My husband and I just had a brand new baby. All of this happening at the same time. And I didn't know how to process it. As an adult, I know a little bit better now, but I would not say I'm even better at understanding how our minds work and how do we coach and counsel Black and brown families about it. Because for me, my family shunned me every time I tried. I mean, like, this is not something Black people do. Black people do not kill themselves. Black people do not have depression. Black people do not have these kinds of issues. What? Well, what am I, like orange or something? Just because the skin is light, I'm Black all the way through. So what the hell? What do you mean I don't have these issues? And there was nowhere to go. So now that we are in a more learned state about mental health, how do you counsel people when they experience things that turn their world upside down and push them toward depression or suicide or whatever else? How are you successfully counseling in that space now?
So I'm currently not in practice, and I did not pursue the licensure role. I went straight into higher ed, but here I am in the role in student affairs. So mental health services is under my unit. So, my degree still, sent
Relevant.
me back to that space. Yes, it still sent me back to that space. But to answer that question, I think one of the things is persons like yourself who have survived, being safe, saying I had a journey, being safe, encouraging other people to seek services. Other people even partner and say, hey, I think you might benefit from this. I'll go with you. Let's go together. Can we go as sisters? Can we go as friends? Can we go as in partnership? Can I go just as a support until you're comfortable? Because I think, and that's of course when we make sure that we stay bonded and connected to other people. But there are people who do feel, lonely, and the loneliness can be debilitating, or are dealing with those different struggles. And I like to talk about purpose. I like to talk about, how your story may heal someone else, and sometimes that's a hard responsibility for people that, hey, I'm hurting, but you're telling me I need to be here to help somebody else heal. It is essential. It is important. We have to get back to a place where we heal our communities, where we learn to get engaged back into our communities. And community could be just one other person.
Right.
And so sometimes when people struggle, they think it's because nobody else knows what they've gone through or knows, their story, knows their level of pain. And so sometimes it's important to share those things with other people to normalize that, we do have challenges, even though it appears that we may be the strongest person or the strongest one. Just like you're saying, postpartum is real, grief is real, loss is real, transitions are real, anxiety is real, other different things that, we may struggle and battle with are real. And sometimes it's okay to not be okay and to say that I'm not okay. And so in that journey of even making sure we provide good, strong, relevant services for the people, the students that we serve, or the people within our community, it's important to let people know it's okay to talk to somebody. And even if your journey starts with journaling, it may start with self-help, it may start with books, it may start with groups, whatever way it is or means it is to get comfortable. But the ultimate goal is to get people to get to a place where they understand purpose, understand that they matter, understand that it's okay sometimes when you're not your 100% best, and what can we do to get to a place where we get to healing. And we have to really break the stigma of, yes, you are strong, but strong people have their kryptonites or their challenges or their weaknesses. And so how do we get to coping with that? And I think a big part of it is how do we normalize this, how do we break the stigma and normalize not being okay all the time?
Yeah. And, I think that, in a lot of ways where we are in our society, we teach men to be strong, right? So I have two children. I have a girl and a boy. My girl is older than my boy. My boy is 23 and my daughter's older. But, we were not fans of encouraging crying or, those little, "Ooh, mommy, this hurts" kind of thing. We are both nurturers. My husband is a third grade teacher and I'm a technologist. And so we both grew up. So he grew up in the same time I did. We both grew up where, parents said, "Get it up, brush it off, get over it, go on, get over it." And a lot of times it wasn't that easy because in addition to losing my mother, so now I left my first husband, moved to Miami, and not a year there am I not raped, right? So all of these things kind of happened and there was no one. And when I tell you no one, there was no one that looked like me, there's no one sounded like me to go and say, "I'm having this problem," who offered a nurturing ear. Relatives and family, "Get over it. You'll be all right. You're just having a difficult day. Go lie down, take a nap." It's so important that people know that there are people that you can talk to. And whether you call one of those hotlines or whether you have a friend, a trusted friend or colleague or an administrator that you feel comfortable and you can go talk to, that person is a lifesaver. And in a lot of ways, where the way we see mental health now is probably the best we've ever seen it. And it's still got miles to go to get to where it really needs to be. So thank you for sharing that. I want to go back to something you said about your daughter and her being vulnerable. I think that's a pretty powerful thing for you to say, right? Because you remember when President Obama was our president and I can't think of his name right now, the chief law officer, I can't think of his name, but Trayvon Martin had not been killed not too long after President Obama became the president. And they were talking about telling their sons how to come home, right? So if you're pulled over, how to come home. And there's a part of almost all human beings, especially if you're young, an invincibility, right? Nothing's going to happen. So, the police officer going to pull over, I will put my hands at 10 and 2 and I'm say, "What's up?" Or, "Why'd you stop me?" or something like that, where you have to caution your children. That's not the language you use anymore, because now you might not come home and they're getting away with this, Thankfully, we got justice with Mr. Floyd and Mr. Arbery, but for the most part, we don't always get justice, right? So, usually You know, the police have a whole lot of power and they can do whatever they want with it. And if you're on the wrong side of that power, you might not come home. But let me say that me and many of my friends didn't have that same conversation with our daughters. We did not say, you know, because, and this might be some flaw in my character, women tend to be more reserved and, you know, kind of, we're not going to jump out the car, you know, trying to fight or why'd you stop me or something. At least that's my estimate. Maybe that's not true. I don't know. But, you know, I didn't have a fear that if a police officer pulled my daughter over, she's going to do anything but whip out her insurance and her license and hand it to him and get her ticket and drive off. She might be pissed, but she ain't going to say nothing. Whereas my son might say, why'd you stop me? I was going the right speed limit. I got everything on my car working. So how do we make that distinction between what we tell and expect from girls different from what we tell boys to make both of them healthy and strong to withstand the storm of life?
Well, at this point, there's no difference. Honestly, at this point, there's no difference. And that's for a lot of different things, you know. I have little kids and I tell them, you know, don't touch your pockets in the store. I tell them, make sure you get a receipt. You know, I tell them, you know, be careful how close you know, touch things. They like to, you know, pick up and look. And then, you know, if you touch your hoodie or your jacket, I want it to look like you picked something up and put it in your pocket. So I'm having that a conversation across the board, actually. So really at this point, there is no distinction for me with just talking about being mindful, being careful, how to engage, you know, and I have to remind myself of certain things as well of the spaces, you know, that I'm in. You know, with so much, even sex trafficking, you know, I'm mindful of when my children go to aisle that's different from me. You know, if they want to look at something, explore, you know, I tell them we need to all go together. If somebody, you know, let's use the restroom before we leave the house. You know, we got to go to the restroom. We all going together. I don't care who it is and how old you are. You know, so that was the big thing, you know, we all going in the same bathroom together because I don't know who's in there and I don't know what's going on. And so with these different things, different dynamics that's going on, I'm having similar conversations across the board with all of my children and even, you know, the students that I work with. You know, I'm encouraging males and females, you know, don't walk by yourself. Don't do this, don't do that. Don't, you know, so I'm really having similar conversations across the board with both because of just other things that we're dealing with. So it's really, honestly, it's really a similar conversation of, you know, protecting yourself, making sure you get home, making sure you're safe, making sure you're watching your environment, doing things with partners, so that you're not alone or by yourself, or you don't get in the space where you wander off and then something happens. So I'm honestly having the same conversation with the boys and the girls.
That's good to know. So we only have a few more minutes, but let me ask you, if you, in your role you're in now, and from when you started, when you first went to school to what have you learned and what would you share with us to help us get to the next level in our lives?
So I try to remind myself, and I often share that I was in school 20 years ago. You know, when I was in college, things were different. A lot of my peers, we lived on campus, you know, it was just school was the focus. We weren't working. You know, now we have students who have full-time jobs. Some of them have children. Some of them live off campus. They have different types of dynamics that they're dealing with from their family systems. And so I have to remind myself when I'm engaging with them, even though we're having a similar HBCU kind of experience, I'm a second gen, raising third gens. Some of the students I'm interacting with are still coming in as first gens. And so because of the region or the background or the history or even the institution I went to, it's a difference in the types of students that each one attracts. So I have to remember that even though, you know, my parents went to college, I have a big sister who was, you know, ahead of me by 10 years. And I kind of knew a little bit about the ropes. The students I'm interacting with, the ropes are new. And even with my child, everything's digital now.
Right.
So it's a different process than when I was standing in line with a punch card and they just go online and, you know, select everything before they show up. And so I have to make sure that I remember not to impose my experience on them and to help them navigate their experience in the world of technology, in the growth that they're dealing with, and even, you know, everything that comes with them, their backgrounds and all of that. So one of the things I really try to do with my students is let them live their moment, be there to encourage and support, but also make sure that, you know, just because I did have an HBCU background, I'm not imposing what was 20 years ago onto them.
Right. That's pretty powerful. That is pretty powerful. You know, it's to keep your emotions and your thoughts and ideas separate from theirs, especially if it's influencing them one way or the other. That's pretty powerful. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. I cannot tell you how helpful this has been for me to have this chat with you. So I can't imagine what your students must experience. So thank you. Thank you very much for this. You know, and I hope you'll come back and talk to me again soon. I hope you'll come back and share some more experiences, because obviously we have a lot to learn.
Definitely. I enjoyed sharing. And like I say, anything that helps our community, anything that helps young people, women, men, anybody, anything that helps our communities as a whole grow, and for even others who may be different or allies to learn, you know, how to interact and how to share and how to support, you know, is important and essential for me.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing an amazing job. I'm glad you're at a historically Black college doing this, because we need all of us to pitch in and kind of help with that narrative. And I hope you continue to have success in this. And if I can help you in any way, please feel free to let me know. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you again for chatting with me today. And I will send you a link as soon as the video converts. Please watch it and let me know if we can upload it.
Okay. Thank you
So much. Stay well.
You too.
Bye.